Hi, my name's Alfie and today I'm going to be showing you exactly how I approach fishing in the upper layers and on the surface. Now, this includes a number of different tactics, mainly zig fishing, actually presenting a hook bait on the surface and free lining. Over the course of this video, hopefully you'll see me putting all three of those into practice and fingers crossed we'll land a carp or two. Now today I'm at Chigborough Fisheries and there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, I'm very familiar with the venue. I do know it quite well, which puts me in better chance of catching one. And second of all, I can actually put those three tactics that I mentioned earlier into use here. There's loads of opportunities to catch them on the surface, zig fishing if need be, and of course, if we're lucky enough, free lining in front of a carp's face. So without further ado, as with any type of fishing, we need to get the location right. So I'm going to go and see if I can find some carp now. It has to be one of the most exciting ways to catch carp. I know there's a few variations in terms of zig fishing, free line and the surface fishing, but most of the time, what you're relying on is actually seeing the carp take your hook bait and then striking to connect to the fish, and I don't think you can beat that experience in carp fishing. You have to remember that carp spend most of their time away from the bottom. They're not heads down, tails up in the silt feeding 24 hours of the day. Most of the time they're cruising around and they're either just enjoying their time. They might not be feeding, but there might be an opportunistic time when a zig suspended in the front of a carp's face that's swimming by might just be enough to tempt it, or other times they might be actively feeding away from the bottom. So on the surface, if you're feeding slicker floaters or riser pellet. So it's really important to make sure that you are skilled and confident away from fishing on the bottom, because there will be situations where it's going to catch you more fish. It hasn't actually taken me long to find some fish. Usually I'd start walking until I saw a situation that I was most happy with. Maybe I'd look at 2 or 3 spots, assess those, and then determine what one was the most likely looking area to get a bite, or maybe what one's got the bigger fish that I want to go for. Having said that, I've walked up the bank, there's a group of fish, I've put one pouch full of slicker floaters out, 5 or 6, and they're in a very confident mood at the minute. It's very early in the morning, usually a good time, and they've taken them all. What I'd usually do now is try and build the confidence, make sure they're definitely up for it, but I can't do that because there are so many seagulls, a number of mallards, Egyptian geese. It's like an aviary down here. So what I'm going to try and do is actually nick one on a single soft hookable floater where I've just fed those fish before I attract the bird life. So it's a little bit different. I usually build their confidence, but they're looking pretty up for it. So we'll see. We'll see if that actually does come to fruition. And if not, I can come up with another plan to distract the bird life down here with some bread, and then maybe focus on where the fish are. So let's go for it. Let's see if I can do it. Right, so you've found the fish, you've built their confidence, and now you're ready to put a hook bait into position. What you don't want to do is cast that float straight into the middle of the fish. You always want to be aiming to cast over the back of the fish and then slowly drawing that float and hook bait into the pack. You're less likely to spook them, more likely to get a bite quickly. There you go. I was actually just firing some slicker floaters out, and he's hooked himself out of nowhere. Yeah, that's the beauty about having a controller float there. A little bit of weight to it, hooks itself. Most of the time you do need to, it's not like, that's the thing with this type of fishing, unless you're using a big bulk machine, sort of 30 grams plus, the act, you have to strike to set the hook. Obviously when you fish on the bottom you have a lead. So with sight fishing it's very important that you strike at the right time. In this instance I've either got slightly lucky or the little bit of sort of resistance from the controller float has hooked the fish. Oh, it's one of the sick mirrors. No way, let's put the pressure on a bit. Very, very few mirrors in this lake. Very few. And it is one of the scaly mirrors. Not huge, but beautiful. Yeah. Well, as you would have just seen, the weed caused me a little bit of a problem there. One of the rare mirrors of the lake, not a big one, but a beautiful one, so let's have a look at him, shall we? That is one of the most unbelievable looking carp I've ever caught. He's a bit spawned out, so he's looking a little bit sort of flat-bellied there, but yeah, check out the scale pattern on him, and that was really quick. 10 minutes of fishing, maybe not even that, and like I said, it's just opportunist fishing, location, getting it right, making sure you've got the tackle to land them, the correct tactics, and this can be the result, but I'll explain everything that I use to catch that fish shortly, but for now, I'm just going to admire this beauty. So let's take a look at the different ways to surface fish, the types of setup you use and why. Ultimately it comes down to distance, and you change in terms of how far you need to cast. Starting off with free lining, the easiest way, the best way, the most effective way in my opinion, simply tying a floater claw onto the end of some zig flow mainline. Of course, it means you can't cast distances 30 yards, might become tricky, but you can actually include using a bread bomb, because if you add a bread bomb to that, it's still free lining, but a nice bit of wet bread secured by the band, you can get distances 40 yards, which again, you might be able to reach fish that you couldn't perhaps otherwise. Then we move up to the surface controller, come in a number of different weights. You can interchange these depending on how far you need to cast. I like using the lightest I can get away with because it makes the less noise. You're less likely to spook the carp. And then when you do need to start fishing distances of 60, 70 yards, maybe a little bit further, then I start looking to the bolt machines. These are the ones that you can hold water a little bit easier at further range, and then a lot of the time this does the job for you because the weight's at one end, and yeah, the bolt effect, hence the name bolt machine, hooks them and it's game on. See how cagey they are, so cagey. If this time of year, well, we had the hottest day ever yesterday, middle of July. They've been fished for on the surface a lot. That's where I really think soft hookable floaters can come into their own, and neutrally buoyant surface bait, because they're taking their time and they're coming up to take the baits so delicately. And if you've got a bait that just flies back in that little bit easier rather than a super buoyant pop-up, game changer a lot of the time. You can achieve the same effect with the zig screws as well. I cut a 12mm scopex squid pop-up down until it barely floats, almost semi-buoyant, just holding that surface layer. And that's made the difference for me when these carp are being a little bit tricky. So if this one gets away with it again, I might actually try the zig screw approach as well, because it means I can keep casting. I use the zig screws for my surface fishing rig and my fixed zigs simply because they are so convenient and super secure as well. I can change the bait in seconds if I want to change colour, if I want to change type. And when I am fishing long range as well, that is really secure. That is a screwed on scopex squid pop up to mimic a slicker floater, and I can barely pull that off with my fingers once it's on there tight. So I can cast that as many times as I need to before I either have to go home because I've blanked or because I've caught a fish. Right, so the conditions have changed quite a bit since I last spoke to you. The wind's picked right up now, and if I was to try and fish how I have been, using a surface controller and a surface hook bait in this wind, it's just not going to look natural. It's going to be extremely difficult. The fish are going to be very suspicious of a really fast-moving hook bait. So I'm going to change tactics. I'm going to start fishing zigs. I'm still going to feed over the top. I know this lake's incredibly shallow, so ideally, if I wanted to position it just in that inch under the surface column, I'd use an adjustable zig, because I can pay it off and do it exactly. But the thing is, it's so shallow here, 2 foot maximum, I think. That's not possible. So what I'm going to do now is just have a quick lead about, just a slight feel to give me a rough idea of the depth. I can tell by how long the lead takes to hit the bottom to give me a rough guess. I'll tie a zig up, and then what I do is hook a little bit of PVA foam through the hook, cast out. If that piece of foam's still on the surface, I know that my zig is too deep, and I'll take it down a couple of inches until that foam is just under the surface, and I'll know exactly how deep it is without having to get a marker float out. Yeah, that is, at a guess, 2 foot. So I'm going to start with a 2 foot zig. If that foam's on the surface, take it down another 2 inches until I know it's just underneath that surface layer, and then get some slicker floaters and a bit of riser pellet over the top, because there are a lot of fish here. That's something I didn't add. There are a lot of fish here. I want to angle for them in here. Zigs it is. The carp could be spending most of their time at a very specific depth, so it's really important that you keep adjusting the zigs until you find exactly the level where they're residing, where they might be up for a bit of a feed. And of course, once you've got that bite, you can make sure all the other zigs are in that zone. Okay, so a fixed zig, very simple to tie, and I'll show you exactly how I tie my zigs up. First of all, I start by taking a spool of 10-pound zig flow, and then I slide on a zig screw. In this instance, because I've been feeding slicker floaters and some riser pellet, I'm actually using the brown zig screw to mimic my free offerings, along with the brown bit of foam that it comes supplied with. After I've slid that onto the line, I'll then take a floater claw. I'm using a size 10 today, and that's my general all-rounder. I'll drop to a size 12 if they've been a little bit finicky, or if I need a little bit more of a secure hook hold. If it's very weedy, snaggy, I'll go up to an 8. I'll tie that on using a Palomar knot, cut that off, slide the zig screw kicker over the eye, secure that in place, and then leave that be. I'll then take my spool of zig flow, measure out the exact length that I need, cut that off, slide on an XL anti-tangle sleeve to aid for anti-tangle properties when you're casting, and then I'll form a figure-of-8 loop knot to secure it in place and set the length. And that is as simple and as effective as it gets. Okay, so when it comes to zigs and the equipment I use when fishing those, to be honest with you, I just use my normal fishing rod. So exactly what I would have been using to fish on the bottom, I just use that as the same setup. Reason for this, one, It means I need less rods. It's a right faff if I was carrying far too many rods. Yeah, and second of all, it's easy to chop and change. I use the same main line. I use 15-pound bullet pretty much religiously. And you have to remember, obviously, when you're fishing zigs, you're going tight down to a lead. You've got a lot of line that's underneath the surface of the water. So if you've got any weed beds, Canadian, anything like that, the line needs to be a little bit stronger, a little bit tougher because it's going to be going through that. Whereas obviously when you're surface fishing, the zig flow remains on the surface the whole time. So my normal setup, 10 foot 3.5-pound scopes, scope GT 6000, 15-pound bullet. When it actually comes to my hook link though, that remains as zig flow, usually 10 pound. And as usual, as I've mentioned before, the weedier and snaggier that it is, I'll step up the breaking strain. I just make that judgment on the day or what venue I'm fishing. So the wind picked up. It's actually got a little bit calmer now than what it was a second ago, but it was impossible to keep my hook bait in the position I wanted it to because the wind was so strong. Birds were being a nightmare, so what I've decided to do is fish a zig just over depth. About 6 inches or so of line just on the surface, and then I've been spotting 1 part riser pellet, 5 parts slicker floater over the top, and yeah, she's just screamed off. That is solid. I have to get the waders. Well, that was a bit hectic. Fortunately enough though, I've returned with a carp in this net. It just shows you the strength of that, of the zig flow and the floater claw hooks. You saw it go right through that weed bed, massive big old bed of Canadian pondweed out there. Got above it, he was free, had to play him for a little bit longer. And yeah, that whole time the hook stayed strong, zig flow's fine, happy days. Well, there we go. Plenty of the session remaining, but that's the zigs ticked off the list. We've had a couple on the surface controller, 1 on the zigs, and I think there's gonna be some more to come as well with the amount of time we've got left. So back she goes, not gonna get her out. Had a good fight, testament to the gear. Go find your bigger brother and sister. When I'm fishing zigs, I tend to drop the lead on most occasions, and this is because it's not comfortable or reassuring when you've got 10-foot hook link, for instance, and you've got the leg dangling away, because you're never in direct contact with the hook hold. So yeah, when you get that slack and the leg swinging about, you're just more likely to suffer hook pull. So I will look to lose a lead on most situations when fishing zigs. I'll fish a standard leg clip when fishing a fixed zig with a tail rubber loosely over the leg clip to make sure that that leg can discharge easily on the take. And when I'm fishing an adjustable zig, I actually use some of our run clips because this is a great system that actually allows you to drop the lead on an adjustable, which was very difficult to do before, while still being able to pay line out and use it in the usual way. So run clips for adjustable zigs, still lose the lead, and then with fixed zigs, just a loosely pushed tail rubber over a normal leg clip. Well, as you might have just seen, I've left the line in the clip just to stop me going into the back of the weed bed. Hit the clip, landed, just trying to get it out of the line clip, and the line just went out of my hand. Luckily, as I just got it out of the clip. So that was the quickest bite of the day in terms of the bait hitting the water. But he's gone right into a weed bed, so I might need to get the old waders on again. Well, I thought there was going to be another bite on the cards, and there certainly was. As you would have just seen, I've just had a mental battle with this mirror, which just shows you the reliability and the effectiveness of the floater claws in the zig flow. In a big old weed bed, I was out there for a little while, slowly teasing him through, and he found his way safely into the back of my landing net. Good job I changed that 50-gram bolt machine. I needed that distance, that's where they were holding up. That's where I managed to get 2 bites really quickly. And yeah, it's been a good day's fishing. Hopefully you've learned a few tips from what I've been able to tell you today. Take that into your own fishing, and make sure you enjoy catching them in the upper layers.